This is a video for Piro 314. It's about plant sentience, plant consciousness. Can plants feel pain? It's in there again, Piro. I'm going to keep arguing this until you admit you're wrong, mate. It's to do with that video about, oh, I can't even remember what it was about. But anyway, I've got about 4 responses to make to this. Let me just see if I can go through them. First, I want to talk about the correlates of pain. Many people talk about correlates of consciousness. I want to talk about the correlates, well, the correlates of sentience really, but specifically the correlates of pain, which is part of sentience, and I'll explain why in a bit. Secondly, I want to talk about double-blind trials for correlates of pain. Then I want to talk about the Turing test, if such a thing exists, for pain. And then I want to talk about calculation and emotion, because you talk about emotion quite a bit in that last video of yours. Okay, let's see if I can go through this a bit of a time. Firstly, the correlates of pain, or the correlates of sentience. You know, there's lots of research done on the neural correlates of consciousness, for example. Very difficult to pin down. Lots of people have made suggestions, but because consciousness is such an ill-defined term, it's really hard to do that in terms of neural correlates, at least. But it's much easier. It's a much more tractable problem when you talk about the neural correlates of sentience. You know, of sensate experience, some of which are organismic. You know, the correlate of vision is an organ like the eye, but some of which are to do with, you know, the wiring beyond the eye, aren't they? And something like pain, which I would say is part of sentience, it's a sense, isn't it? It's part of our sensory system, is very easy in terms of correlates. We know about nociceptors and about central nervous system activation and about basal ganglia and about brainstem, and you know, we know which what the biochemical pathways of all that kind of stuff is. I mean, to the extent where we can apply analgesia and target some of those processes in order to be able to relieve pain. So we're pretty damn good at the correlates of pain. Yeah, I hope that's true. Some animals possess those correlates and some don't. Plants don't possess the correlates of pain. You know, there is nothing in these creatures here. Whatever this is, sycamore tree, has no correlates of any of those things I've just mentioned. Okay. Whereas I do, my dog does, cows do, sheep do, you know, badgers, rabbits, giraffes. Okay, second thing, double-blind trials. That pattern of correlates of something like the sentience, particularly the sentience of pain, are very reliable and can be established through double-blind trials. If I was to take a creature, let's say a human being, subject them to pain and then measure the various disturbances in those systems that I've mentioned, you know, measure increased nociceptor activation, measure increased levels of certain biochemicals, those kind of things, you know, I could get a really clear profile of what pain, how pain was represented in terms of those correlates. I mean, to the extent where if someone knew what they were talking about, they could look at that readout and they could compare it with other readouts, and they could say this person is in pain, this person isn't in pain, you know, 100% reliably pretty much. And you could ask the person and say, yes, I'm in pain, stop doing that, you know. It's very clear. So that okay, so there are correlates for pain, and those correlates can be established through something like double-blind trials, and have been many times. Okay, Turing test related to the last one. Yes, I can stand a person behind a screen. I can administer pain to them. I can get the readings, and I can show you those readings, and you would say there's a person in pain. I can also take Phoebe, or a cow, or a chicken, or a sheep, any, you know, reasonably large sentient creature that's got those attributes I just mentioned, those correlates. I can stick them behind the screen and I can measure their outputs, increased nociception, increase in biochemical activity in these areas that I've mentioned, and I could show them to you, and you know, provided they were equilibrated in terms of how those readouts look, you and no one else would be able to tell the difference, you know, behind what was behind that screen. You would just know there was something behind that screen that was showing all the biochemical signals of a creature in pain. You wouldn't be able to tell whether it was a human or another kind of animal. You wouldn't. I mean, you could even dramatise that little test. You could stick a cow behind the screen, and you could stick a human behind the screen, a loved one behind the screen, you could subject them to some kind of mild pain, you know, stick a little pin in the cow and stick a little pin in the human. Get those responses and feed them back to the person in front of the screen and say, okay, these are the responses. You choose which one you would like to kill and eat. You choose, it's fine. You can tell the difference between these outputs. Fine, you choose which one you want us to slice up and put in the barbecue for you. And yeah, it'd be 50-50, you know, whether you're eating a loved one or whether you're eating a cow. Okay, so last one, slightly unrelated, although I hope I'm going to try and loop it in. It's to do with calculation. I've talked about this before, and I'm mentioning this because you do talk about emotion in that video of yours there, Piro. And it's important, you know, it really is important. I mean, personally, I would say that thinking, the thing that I can do, the thing that Phoebe can do, the thing that most creatures can do, I suspect, that have got sentience, is a kind of sentient calculation. You know, they're able to do calculation, and then it's a felt calculation. It's a kind of felt interpretation of the world. I don't just mean grongignol emotions, you know, they're not just crying and laughing the whole time, but that whole kind of texture of felt responses that we have to the world, which makes it alive for us and which makes it alive for Phoebe and for other animals. You know, that's what separates the sheep from the grass. I don't think grass or trees or plants have any of that for the reasons I've already mentioned. But this calculation thing is important. Calculation and emotional driven sentience. Because I would possibly agree with you if you were to say that plants can calculate. I know it sounds mad, but I think I might agree with you to say that plants can calculate. And by calculate, I don't just mean they can do you know, the 7 times table and quadratic equations and the no-Euler's theorem and all those kind of things. I don't mean that. I mean they can take information from the world and kind of process it in ways which make sense. Which make kind of logical sense. I've been trying to think of an analogy from human experience, and the one I've got right now is something like catching a cricket ball or a baseball. You know, a baseball is coming towards you, a cricket ball is coming towards you. You look at it, you can carry on a conversation with the person next to you, you reach your hand up and you pluck it out of the sky. You know, for me that's a kind of calculation. You know, I'm looking at the ball and it's getting slightly larger, it's subtending a slightly larger arc on my retina. And my brain is interpreting that enlargement, that enlarged image on the retina, as something moving towards me. It's doing a calculation. You know, it's calculating distance based on the, you know, the larger image on the retina. I've also got 2 eyes, which I'm focusing on the ball, which means that I'm using the parallax to calculate distance as well. I'm using that depth perception, exactly the same way that Barnes-Wallis used to derive the system for getting the right height of the aeroplanes when they delivered the bouncing bombs to those dams in Germany. If you watch the film The Dam Busters, you know what I'm talking about. But either way, it's a method of calculating distance by using parallax. Now, of course, you know, our brains, I don't think, have got that instantiated in terms of formal mathematics, but they're actually doing it. They've got that mathematics embodied. So it's doing the calculation. And as the ball comes towards me, that helps me understand where it is. When it gets really close, I bring my hand up, so my hand is in the field of vision, and now I'm triangulating 3 objects. I'm triangulating where my eye is, where the ball is, and where my hand is. And my task now is just to try to collapse one of the lines of that triangle between these 2 objects down to 0. So as the ball comes closer, I move my hand closer until that line is 0 and the ball is in my hand. So it's a long calculation process, and it's the same calculation, kind of calculation at least, that I'm using when I drive my car, or you know, or when I'm walking right now. All the time I'm walking, my feet are calculating where the ground is and avoiding obstacles and things completely without any of that conscious process accompanying that. It's just how it happens really. Now I would perhaps agree with you if you were going to say that plants could do that. Again, they don't do calculations, they haven't got the brain to do it. We don't really need the brain to do all that calculation. If all you've got to do is keep the head of a sunflower oriented towards the sun, you would just need some basic geometry embedded and embodied into the you know, the system of biochemistry that operates the sunflower, and how the stalk works, and how the, you know, that's all you would need. It's a kind of embodied mathematics, an embodied calculation. So yeah, so I would go along with that. But they don't have the machinery of sentience, they don't have the machinery of pain response, they don't have the machinery of positive and negative evaluation. I can't see that. None of the correlates exist. They failed the Turing test wildly. You know, you could put a cabbage behind that screen and test it for now till doomsday, and believe me, you wouldn't have any problem distinguishing that from your loved one or from a cow. Not right, Phoebe? So yeah, plants can calculate, go along with that. You could probably build a computer out of cabbages, but they don't feel anything. We do, and it's completely implicit to our sentience, and so do animals. It's completely implicit into theirs.